So the next step is called voicing, which is where you give the pipe its voice, or adjust it so that it speaks properly. And I've tried several times to film this in a concise way. It's kind of difficult because each pipe has different problems. But I'll try to show the most general process here and then talk through a couple of occasional difficulties that arise. So the first voicing step that we've already done is opening the flue the rest of the way, since it prints a little bit constricted. And earlier I hit a snag by snapping the tip of my scalpel off in the flue, and then I was worried that it might come loose and like get in my mouth or something later while I'm playing. So I had to reprint this part. And then the next step, so opening the flue all the way. First cut it as long as it's supposed to be, and then use the feeler gauge to kind of burnish it wider, burnish it to a precise, consistent width all the way across, and also make the corners square. And that looks pretty good. And then insert the second labium, which we also already did in that other universe where I got this right on the first try. But I had to reprint some of these pieces multiple times because I kept making mistakes. And that's like the raw assembled pipe. And let's see what it sounds like. It barely makes a sound, mainly because, well, there's several reasons. The first one is that the second languid is overhanging the flue and just blocking the wind sheet as it comes out. So to get the second languid out of the way, I just need to cut it back as precisely and evenly as I can. I'm probably going to adjust it by less than a millimeter here before it's done. First, I'm just going to shave off the layer lines, removing as little material as possible from this, which prints as a side surface. That's probably not quite far enough. Actually, that sounds decent. And then this is with the mouth all the way open. And it was flat there because my finger was in the way a bit. If I close the mouth now, not that far, but just until the upper mouth, which is this opening, is about the same height as the front surface of the second languid. You can hear that it produces a slightly more, a brighter and more penetrating sound, but also it's sluggish to start speaking. Although this one is actually doing pretty well. It's usually worse than that. So to speed up the speech, I just need to cut a little bit off the bottom of the labium, which brings the upper lip, the edge that the wind sheet hits, farther forward. And the farther forward part is what's important here. The fact that it's moving higher, I'm going to correct for that by just sliding it lower in the groove. So this doesn't need very much cutting here. Okay, that sounds really good. Let's try overblowing it. Okay. that also sounded good. Sometimes when you go to overblow it, there's sort of a warbly sound that I don't know what to do about. So when that happens, I often end up reprinting some of the pieces. The good thing about this design is if anything really goes wrong, typically you only have to reprint, at most, these three pieces: the foot, the second labium, the foot, the second languid, and the labium, and then most of the pipe is fine. Some other things that may happen when you're voicing are if the second languid isn't really tight in its spot, if there's any tendency of it to move around, it will move around and it'll unwantedly change the sound. So if that happens, just use something like these broken tweezers to remove it, and then add a dab of glue there and a dab of glue there, and put it back on, and then it'll stay in place. And when if or when you do that, make sure that the front edge of the second languid is like parallel to the flue. If they're slanted relative to each other, that tends to cause problems. If the joints in the pipe are unusually leaky, then you may have trouble getting the pipe to not overblow, in which case it might be fine after you glue it. What else is there? Sometimes the pipe will make a sound when the mouth is open, but when you close it, it doesn't do anything. And when that happens, it's just an extreme case of the upper lip being too far back, and you need to cut it forward by several layer lines. If you have to cut it forward by like more than 1 millimeter or 5 layer lines, then chances are it's not salvageable because it'll make the sound duller and the pipe will overblow too easily. Cutting the second languid too far back also tends to make the pipe overblow too easily, so in that case you have to reprint the second languid. Any damage to the flue tends to mess things up because it prints once you've opened the flue all the way. There's really no further helpful thing you can do to it by hand. It prints pretty much better than you could ever adjust it. Those are the most common problems that I've run into, and I've voiced close to 80 of these pipes at this point. And yeah, it would be great if anyone existed who has lots of experience doing this, but you can watch pipe organ voicing content from the traditional organ builders on YouTube, where they're using metal pipes, and that's a bit different from this because they're able to bend the metal and then bend it back, which is like most of what they do. They don't spend as much time cutting as I do on these plastic ones, and they can't slide this up and down to adjust it. But the basic geometry concepts are the same. And one more thing is, sometimes on the second languid, first of all, this is the front side. The narrower side is the front, and the taller side is the back. Sometimes there will be like a bit of over extrusion right at the tip here, which makes the lower mouth too high, and that also affects the sound. From time to time I've tried to cut the underside of it to make the lower mouth shorter, but I've never definitively found that to be the solution to any problem, so I don't know. A crack at the base of this thin part will also cause problems, so watch out for that. If this upper lip is blunted at all, that will affect the sound and make it duller and kind of airier. And any ragged edges or unevenness on any of these edges will cause trouble as well. So it requires patience, and you're probably going to have to practice a few times. So print a few extra pipes to practice on before you, and don't expect it to go perfectly on the first try. It requires patience.